Welcome to r/ProRevenge. This is a story of someone getting back at someone with ProRevenge after being wronged. And today's story is, I just wanted my deposit back. So about 10 years ago, my wife, then girlfriend, and I decided to move in together. She was sick of living in a dorm, and my lease was up, and we had a family friend that was looking for someone to move into a little granny flat under their house. I say under because they lived on a steep hill, where the flat was below the house, with an entrance on the back side. So we had this incredible view out back, a pool, we'll get to that insane thing, fire pit, etc., and the rent was in our price range. And the LL, let's call her Mary, even dropped $100 if we did some yard work, skim the pool, etc. Oh, my parents owned a couple rentals and have my whole life. I've done maintenance for them and even attended a couple of court cases as well with them. This will come into play later. Everything was great for a couple of months. Then Mary and her wife started fighting. Screaming matches, stomping above us, throwing things. I didn't understand how people could be that mad at each other that often and still be together. I eventually sent them an email saying we were not comfortable with the fighting and we wanted to make sure they were okay, etc. They replied to that with, "You're lucky you have a place this nice." Mary began to scrutinize the yard and pool work I was doing, to the point she would insist I vacuum and skim the saltwater pool with no chemicals. Saltwater pools need far less chlorine than regular ones, but they still need some. Wanted me to stop mowing and use a weed whacker, only because the mower was getting old and tired. Really petty things. The last straw was when a driver was shot in a gang shooting across the street. We decided to cut our losses and get out of there. Found a new apartment and a roommate, one of my wife's college friends, that was open a month later. Perfect for us. We were on month to month on this place. Emailed Mary that we were moving out in 30 days, etc. At this point, she went insane. Tried to do daily inspections of the granny flat, would call and email daily with chores around the property she'd insist we do, and would pound on her floor, our ceiling, every time she heard so much as a whisper. Daily inspections would require 24 hours notice. She never gave that. Then she tried to bring potential renters over to see the flat. We flat out told her to go away when that happened, with no notice. Finally, 2 weeks before move out, she had a pest control guy stop by when I was at work and my wife was in class. Our cat was home alone, and we got the notice about spraying pesticide from her in a text about the same time the guy started. So I rush home after work, stop by upstairs and ask for a copy of the pest control receipt. I have massive allergies to most pesticides, so I need to know what was used. She goes into her office and brings back a copy with every single chemical on the list checked off. Every single one. I immediately take the copy, run down, grab the cat and a handful of clothes, and drive to my parents' house. We stayed there 4 days, hoping everything would clear out in time for us to finish packing and cleaning. The last couple days before move-out, Mary was out of town, and we were able to get it completely finished a day early. We'd even patched nail holes, painted, cleaned the carpet. My mom came and helped us get it ready for the next tenants. It was immaculate, and we took photos and video of everything. When Mary did the checkout with us, we said we weren't comfortable being there without filming, legal to do, and she did a short walkthrough, stating it was fine, but that her copier was broken and she'd have to email us the final copy. 2 days later, we got that copy, with $1,400 in damages claimed above our deposit, including a number of charges like, my wife had to replace a screw in a cabinet, $1 for screw, $15 for labor. I was livid. The place was spotless. My mother, a landlord who does all her own prep work and rentals, helped us, and we'd been very non-confrontational, except for filming the walkthrough. I had kept every email, text, and letter from them and started to put together a small claims case. I figured she would already be doing the same. Luckily, I knew my tenant rights and that she'd violated them a lot, including email chains where I'd point out 24-hour notice laws, etc., in emails and she'd reply to them. Finally, I called the exterminator. The conversation went like this. "Hi, you sprayed my flat without my permission because my landlord ordered it with no notice to me, with my cat inside, and used every chemical on your receipt." "We most certainly did not. Here's a copy of the work order. We only put out ant traps on the outside." "Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you for your clarification." Armed with that last little piece, I countersued, asking for a bad faith penalty, as well as our deposit. Bad faith was 3 times deposit, so I was asking for a total of 4 times what we'd given Mary on move-in. The big day came in court. I showed up early, had everything in order and ready, and she swaggers in, huffed up and clearly ready to put me in my place. We sit outside the courtroom for about 20 minutes, until a courtroom worker asks the waiting room if anyone would be willing to go to mediation instead, since they were booked solid. We both say yes and go into a mediation room with an arbitrator whose job was just to keep us civil and answer any legal questions they could while staying neutral. Mary lays out her case. It takes about 4 minutes. The arbitrator looked very neutral still. Then I present my case, bringing up each violation, each lie, and end it with the work order from the exterminator, both copies. At this point, the arbitrator looks visibly upset, and I can tell they're just trying to stay neutral. Mary then asks them, why is he asking for 4 times the deposit? The arbitrator then explains the bad faith penalty, then looks at me. Would you be okay dropping the penalty for your deposit back? Sure. They looked over at Mary. I can't tell you what to do, but what I can say is, if you decide to go back into that courtroom in front of a judge, it's not likely to go in your favor. I swear they really said this. I know they're not supposed to, but they did. I got my deposit back. The second story is, you won't pay rent? Good luck finding a new apartment. So this happened to me about 10 years ago, in a big city on the West Coast. Hopefully this counts as pro-revenge. I had just finished grad school and was looking for a way to cut down on rent in an already expensive rental market. Now, mind you, I was young, desperate, and inexperienced with roommates at the time, and this was a huge life lesson for me, and hopefully for my roommate too. I placed an ad for a roommate on Craigslist, which in hindsight wasn't a smart move. Enter Bad Roommate. Bad Roommate was a few years older than me, and at first seemed really cool, with a stable job as a licensed masseuse. After interviewing her, hitting it off really well and getting to know each other for about a month, we rented a loft in downtown, around October, with the agreement rent and utilities would be split. Around the time our first rent was due, November, Bad Roommate said that her work had been slow, and she would pay rent in the next 2 weeks. Luckily, I had enough in savings, so I covered rent. Well, the 2 weeks came and went and still no rent. When I asked her about the rent, she yelled obscenities and accused me of being abusive and harassing her. No kidding. While claiming she didn't have money for rent, she would be out of the house from around 9 a.m. until around 2 a.m., visiting friends. All of this nonsense continued on as well as other things, such as stealing my food and breaking some of my belongings, including a bottle of wine that my recently deceased sister had gifted to me. Bad Roommate's excuse was bad energy in the house, while giving me a little smirk. Fast forward to the beginning of December, and you guessed it, still no rent. This time, in addition to yelling obscenities, accusing me of being abusive, and breaking my stuff, Bad Roommate called the police on me, accusing me of making threats. The cops did not do anything, as there was no evidence I did anything. For the record, I didn't, but they did give me a lecture about making threats, and said next time they come out, I could be arrested or forced to leave the residence. By this time, I was almost out of savings, and was fearing eviction. Bad Roommate had not paid rent since moving in. The final straw came when I came home from work, to find her threatening my 2 cats, who were cowering in the corner. I almost lost it, but due to what happened before with the police, I didn't want to poke the fire. This is when I remembered the officer saying I could be forced to leave the residence, and a light bulb went off in my head. Now the revenge part. I called my best friend, whose father, best friend's dad/attorney, was an attorney. After a phone consultation with him, he told me to pay up the rent and utilities through December, and then simply surrender my key, garage remote, etc., with a signed note saying that I surrendered possession of the property with a specified date. I snapped a photo of this note and left it with the secretary in the management office. I then proceeded to sign a new lease with the last of my savings. 1 week before Christmas, while Bad Roommate was out visiting friends, I packed up all my belongings and left the house pretty much empty, except for the little bit of belongings she had, a little bit of food in her bed. After about 2 days of angry voicemails, texts, and missed calls from Bad Roommate telling me what a horrible and irresponsible person I was to do this, boom, dead silence until April. In April, I was served with a summons for breach of contract for abandoning the lease by the landlord. I contacted the attorney, aka best friend's dad, and filed a response to the court, with the hearing date set in late May. I showed up to the hearing with my friend's dad, attorney, and his 2, I'm guessing they were assistants. Bad Roommate was also there looking smug. Think wine bottle incident smirk. Next thing I know, the other attorney announces they are dismissing me from the lawsuit, since I surrendered possession of the property, but they were not dismissing it against Bad Roommate. Bad Roommate's face went gaunt, the smirk disappeared, and it was priceless. After some back and forth, with her almost getting held in contempt of court for outbursts, the judge ruled against my roommate, with full judgment awarded to the landlord. The first cherry on top? Best friend's dad represented me pro bono. The final cherry on top? I came to find out a month later via an angry voicemail from Bad Roommate that after being kicked out of a friend's house while couch surfing, her credit was trashed. She had an eviction on her record, and subsequently could not get another apartment, and that again I was a horrible, irresponsible person. I never heard from her again afterwards, but she was on the news a few months later, mugshot and all, for trashing a convenience store. Last I heard, she moved to Las Vegas. In the end, my credit did take a small hit. Even though the suit was dismissed, the debt was put into collections and reported to the credit bureau. For the next 4 years, I tried unsuccessfully to have it removed. At the 4-year anniversary of the lawsuit, I petitioned the credit bureau under the advice of my friend's dad/attorney to clear my record, as the statute for filing suit had expired at the 4-year mark. Failure to comply with the request would result in a lawsuit against the credit bureau for slander of credit. To be honest, I just followed his instructions, not knowing what I was even talking about. A couple days later, I received a call that my record had been cleared. Long story, but in the end it was worth it to get back at an otherwise horrible person. And the last story is, I froze my psycho neighbor out of her apartment. In college, my two friends and I decided to find a place together off campus. We found a beautiful 3-bedroom house with surprisingly affordable rent. The basement of the house was listed as a separate apartment, but as it had a separate entrance and the indoor stairwell had been blocked off, we weren't worried. And the thermostat was upstairs. Then the demon neighbor moved in. From upstairs, we could hear everything. This adult woman would call her mother and scream at her to pay for her cell phone bills and give her grocery money, aka Taco Bell and cheap tequila. She would scream at whatever guy she was sleeping with to bring her meth, and one day she brought home 3 puppies to scream at too. We were terrified of this woman, and the noise was heck. Also, we'd been idiotic enough to sign a lease, stating we were responsible for all utilities, period, meaning we were now financing her gas, water, and electric. But with only 2 months left on the lease, we thought we could just ride it out. But then she started smoking, constantly. According to the landlord, she'd quit for good when she signed the lease, but for good only lasted 2 days. Since it was winter, the heat was running nearly 24/7, and the smoke was wafting up from the vents. Our apartment and all our belongings began to reek with smoke. We contacted the landlord because we'd signed for a bloody non-smoking apartment. He told us we lived in a state where you could technically call an apartment non-smoking, even if it shared ventilation with a smoking apartment. F you, leasing laws. At this point, my 2 roommates were heading out for a 2-week vacation. They were online students, while I was residential, leaving me alone in the apartment with the demon smoker in the basement. I couldn't sleep or eat because my idiotic stomach decided to react to all the secondhand smoke by aching and cramping constantly. After 3 days, I was a little insane. I made a plan. I checked the forecast, lows in the 20s all week. I borrowed a friend's ultra-insulated sleeping bag. I bought one of those ski masks with the holes for your eyes and mouth. I got out my stocking cap, my silk-long underwear, my woolen socks, and my down parka. I bought tea, hot cocoa, and ramen, and prepared to live off a diet of hot liquids. And I turned off the effing heat. Day 1, she's screaming at her mother for forcing her to move into this frozen SH hole of an apartment. Day 2, she's screaming at her boyfriend, meth dealer, because he won't let her move in with him. Day 3, she's screaming at the landlord about how she's effing freezing. Day 4, the landlord's at my door. I greet him in full ski mask, parka, stocking cap array, looking like I'm heading out to rob Santa Claus at the North Pole. He asks me if I don't find it a little chilly in the house. I reply I'd found all the cigarette smoke a little warm. Day 5, she's screaming about the bees upstairs to anyone who will listen, and I'm sitting upstairs clutching my car keys and my pepper spray with 911 typed into my phone. She finally decides she's effing leaving and moving in with Greg, even though he just got out for stabbing Travis, and he lives in that effing creepy house in the woods with all those a-hole biting dogs. Day 6, she's gone. I silently bless Greg. Moral of the story, there's a bloody reason the rent seems too good to be true. P.S. For those wondering, I did have a friend who worked plumbing stop by to give me some advice about how low I could go before I burst the water pipes to heck and back. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day.